I still remember that night clearly. Sunday, March the 15th, 2024. The smell of saffron and golden garlic filled the whole little kitchen. That familiar smell from over 35 years of family dinners. I was stirring the jambalaya, listening to the oil sizzle, with a simple peace in my chest. Helen was setting out the old lace tablecloth, the same one my mother had embroidered. Sarah brought the cake from the corner bakery, and Kevin, our only son, sat down at the table in his light blue polo shirt, his face seemingly calm, but his eyes were different. I noticed it instantly. Being a father means that just a frown or a sigh from your son is enough to feel a strange signal. "You okay, son?" I asked. Kevin smiled stiffly, that half smile he'd picked up ever since he started working. "I'm fine, Dad." The dinner started with small talk. Helen talked about the weather. Sarah shared things from work, and I tried to make jokes to keep the mood light. But every word landed on a table like a small stone tossed into a deep well. Nobody was really listening to anyone. I remember I served more shrimp onto Kevin's plate, just like I did when he was a kid. He looked at me with a cold, metallic stare, and suddenly dropped his spoon. The sound of the metal against the porcelain cracked the air like a whip. "Dad," he said, his voice low and clear, "I think it's time to tell the truth." I looked up. "Tell what, son?" He took a deep breath and pronounced every word with precision. "Dad, you're still sitting here because this is still your house, but not because you're welcome." That sentence landed in the middle of the dining room like a rock thrown into still water. Helen froze, her spoon suspended in midair. Sarah looked down, avoiding my gaze. I smiled weakly. "What did you say, son? Did I hear you wrong?" "No, you heard me right, Dad," Kevin replied. His voice didn't tremble. It showed no anger, only emptiness. "It's time for you to understand that things are going to change." I looked around. The family photos on the wall, the picture where I was holding him on his first day of school, the grandfather clock ticking in its steady rhythm. Everything was the same, except for the air, which was already dead. Nobody said another word. After a silence that felt endless, Kevin stood up. "Sarah, let's go." The door shut, leaving a dry echo in the empty kitchen. I stayed seated, looking at the plate of still warm jambalaya, watching the steam fade into the air. Helen didn't dare look at me. I picked up my spoon. I tried a bite in silence. The flavor, once intense, now tasted like sand. "Funny," I muttered without looking up. "It's the first time I've tasted my own cooking, and it doesn't make me want to choke." Helen burst into tears, but I stayed quiet. I knew that from that moment, something in our family had died. That night, while she slept, I stayed alone under the yellow light of the dining room and wrote the first line in my notebook. March 15th, 2024. My son told me I'm not welcome in my own home. I didn't know then that this sentence would be the beginning of the biggest battle of my life. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments below. I couldn't sleep that night. The tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the living room echoed with the regularity of a strange heart. Familiar and yet unsettling. Helen had gone to the bedroom, but I was still there, sitting in front of the now cold plate of jambalaya and the two empty chairs. One belonged to the son I raised with all my effort, the other to the daughter-in-law I once thought would bring joy to this house. Now both were ice cold. I rested my chin on my hand and looked at my reflection in the window pane. A gray-haired man with sunken eyes and a slightly stooped back looked back at me. I knew that image well, but that night, the man in the reflection seemed like a stranger. "What did we do wrong with him, Arthur?" I muttered. There was no answer, only the whistle of the wind on the balcony and the slight rattling of the dining room lamp. I took the small notebook out of my pocket. On the first page, the shaky sentence I had written earlier was still visible. I added another line. "My son has grown up. He's successful, has a wife. His own house. But why does he look at me today like I'm a stranger? I remembered the years when he was a boy. When I'd get home late from work, he would wait for me at the door with a crooked drawing of the two of us, father and son, holding hands. "You're my hero, Dad," he used to tell me. Every time life weighed me down, that phrase gave me strength. Now that same boy, turned into a man, looked at me without recognition. Maybe time changed him. Or maybe I was the one who let something die between us without noticing. Around 2 a.m, Helen came out in her bathrobe. Her eyes were swollen. "Come to bed, Arthur. We'll talk tomorrow." I nodded, but I didn't move. She came closer and put her hand on my shoulder. He didn't mean it. Maybe he just spoke out of anger. I looked at her in silence. "Do you really believe that?" Helen looked down. I knew she was trying to cling to a little bit of hope, as if words could be erased from memory. But there are phrases that, once spoken, are etched forever in the soul of the person who hears them. After she left, I stayed there, looking at the family portrait hanging on the wall. We had taken it on my 60th birthday. I was in the center with my arm around Kevin's shoulders, and next to me, Helen was smiling sweetly. A photo that once represented harmony. Now it looked like a relic. I closed the notebook, got up and started clearing the table. The clash of the porcelain plates sounded fragile but sharp, like glass breaking inside me. As I washed the jambalaya pot, my hands were shaking so much that the spoon fell into the sink. Cold water splashed onto my face. I smiled bitterly. Maybe it was the first time in my life that I was afraid of my own home. Before turning off the light, I wrote one last line. Tomorrow, I won't ask myself why he said that. Tomorrow I'll find out why he dared to say it. And I knew then that the next sunrise would be unlike any other in my 67 years of life. I woke up when the Chicago sky was still covered in a light fog. The smell of freshly brewed coffee that Helen was making filled the kitchen. A familiar smell that morning, felt strange to me. She had her back to me, wearing her old, slightly wrinkled blue robe. From the tension in her shoulders, I knew she hadn't slept either. I sat down in silence, watching her silhouette for a long time. 35 years of living together had taught me to read her mood just by the way she stirred her coffee. That morning the spoon was turning slowly, barely trembling. "You didn't sleep either?" I asked softly. I closed my eyes for a bit, she answered without turning around. I sighed. "I need to understand what happened last night, Helen. Why did Kevin say those things?" The spoon stopped. A long silence passed before she turned around. Her eyes were red, as if she had fought an internal battle all night. I think it's time I told you everything." "Everything?" I raised my eyebrows. "What do you mean?" She sat down across from me. In that instant, I felt an invisible distance open up between us, as if the years we shared were just a distant memory. Helen interlaced her hands. Her voice trembled. 3 weeks ago, Kevin came to see me. He said he wanted to talk about the family's future. At first, I thought it was about his job, about normal plans. But then he mentioned that we're getting older, that it would be wise to plan the inheritance to avoid problems later. I stayed silent. She lowered her head, unable to look at me. I objected, Arthur. I told him this house is ours, the fruit of your whole life's work. But he insisted, day after day, calling, coming over. I softened up. I thought maybe he just wanted to help, to be responsible. "And so you agreed?" I asked, my voice low but icy. "Not exactly, but I didn't tell you. I was afraid you'd get angry, that it would hurt you." I let out a dry laugh. "Afraid it would hurt me, so you preferred to stab me in the back?" Helen trembled. Tears fell into the already cold coffee cup. I looked at her. The woman who had shared so many struggles with me, now here she was, with the eyes of someone trying to justify betrayal with tenderness. "It was Sarah's idea," she finally said. She told Kevin that if we distributed the assets now, we'd save on inheritance taxes, that it was a smart financial decision. She also mentioned that you're not young anymore, that if you got sick one day, everything would get complicated. I clenched my fists until my knuckles turned white. Smart financially, but stupid morally. The air between us became thick. Helen murmured, almost voiceless, "I made a mistake, Arthur. I just thought that if our son was planning something like this, maybe it was out of fear. Fear of losing opportunities. Fear of the future. I didn't have the courage to stand up to him." I watched her for a long time, and in the midst of my anger, I understood that her fear wasn't just about losing her son, but about admitting that family love could turn into a calculated exchange. I got up and walked to the window. The dim morning light filtered through the curtains, tinting my face a pale gold. "Helen, I need to know everything, every word, every visit, every detail." "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice breaking. I looked at her. My tone was calm but as firm as steel. "I'm going to find out who in this house is still truly my family." Helen broke down crying, but I didn't comfort her. At that moment, there was no more space for tears in me. All that was left was a cold, absolute determination to find out the truth, even if it cost me everything. Helen cried for a long time that morning. I let her. Partly out of anger, partly because I knew that sometimes tears are the only way for a person to regain a bit of the conscience they lost. The house sank into a heavy silence, broken only by the whisper of the wind outside the window. The morning light filtered through the curtains, illuminating the family portrait hanging on the wall. That picture, which used to fill me with pride, now watched me with an old, accusatory gaze. I made another cup of coffee and placed it in front of Helen. She looked at me, confused, her voice hoarse from so much crying. "I don't know where to start, Arthur." "Start at the beginning, Helen. Talk to me as if you were talking to a stranger without hiding anything." She nodded, clutching her handkerchief with both hands. "After that first conversation, remember the day you went for your checkup? That same morning, Kevin called me. He asked how you were feeling and then said you'd been forgetting things lately, that maybe the signs of old age were appearing. I told him you were perfectly lucid, but he just laughed and told me, 'You'll understand soon enough.' I felt ice creep up my spine. How many times has he said that? Many? Almost every week. Sarah advised me to think long-term, that we needed to prepare for the future. She said there were legal and discreet ways to ensure your well-being and the whole family's. If one day—" Helen stopped, unable to continue. "If one day I lose my mind," I interrupted, my voice cold. She looked down and nodded, trembling. "I tried to avoid it, Arthur," she continued after a few seconds. "But Sarah came to the house when you weren't here. She brought binders, charts, figures. She spoke with that language of reason. Finances, taxes, assets, planning. But in her eyes, there was only ambition. She made me feel small, ignorant, like I didn't understand the world anymore. And when Kevin took her side, I got scared. I watched her closely. Under the dim light, Helen looked much older. Deep wrinkles marked her face, scars of time and of love wearing thin. Scared of what, Helen? I asked gently. Scared of losing our son? Scared he'd see us as a burden? Scared that one day he wouldn't come back? I closed my eyes. A part of me wanted to scream at her, to call her a coward. But another part, the part that has loved her since we were 20, understood that she was a prisoner of the most human fear of all, the fear of a mother no longer being needed. I went over and put a hand on her shoulder. "Helen, I don't blame you. You just got lost inside your own affection. But now you have to help me." She looked up, her eyes wide, wet. "Help you? Do what?" I looked toward the window. The sun was bathing the oak tree in the yard. and the wind slowly moved its leaves. I'm going to do what we should have done a long time ago. Protect this house, not with tears, but with the truth. Helen nodded. The tears returned, but without sobs. We both knew that, from that moment, our lives would never be the same again. A storm was approaching, and even though we were on opposite sides, we both heard the same thunder in the distance. That afternoon, Chicago was warmer than usual. The lazy sun slid between the branches of the oak tree in the yard, leaving golden patches on the red brick patio. I was in my small study at the end of the hall, the room I always jokingly called my retirement office. On the desk were old binders, bank statements, and my ledger with all the household expenses from the last few years. I had kept that habit since my working days. Every number had to have a reason. But that afternoon, among all the lines of numbers and meticulous notes, something chilled my blood. A small transfer, just a few $100s, had been made from my account in February in the name of that person. I didn't know anyone by that name. I flipped through the pages quickly. 2 more movements to the same recipient, and all 3 transactions coincided exactly with the dates Helen told me Kevin had come to talk about the family's future. I leaned back in my chair. A familiar phrase echoed in my mind. Someone is trying to open the door to your life without using the key. I called the bank. After several minutes of verification, the voice of James Fisher, an old acquaintance and manager at the branch, came on the line. Mr. Arthur, according to our records, these operations were authorized by your legal representative. Legal representative? I interrupted. What are you talking about, James? There's a power of attorney signed by you. I fell silent. Signed? Are you sure? We've cross-referenced it with the old documents. The signature matches perfectly. I hung up, my hand shaking. In that instant, I felt as if the whole room was tilting. I, who had signed hundreds of contracts in my life, who never confused a signature, was being victimized by someone who had forged my own name. I opened the drawer and took out the saved files, the copies of past documents. I knew every stroke of my handwriting, every curve of the A in Arthur. But if the imposter had my examples, they could easily fool any bank employee. I remembered the times Kevin had come into my study saying he needed to look for the tax papers to help me with the online filing. Back then, I felt proud that he cared about me. Now, remembering it, I felt the same sting of betrayal that an open wound leaves. I took the binders to the dining room, where Helen was peeling an apple. Helen, do you remember the last time Kevin came into my study? She looked up, avoiding my gaze. About 2 or 3 weeks ago. He said he was looking for an envelope with receipts. What envelope? I don't know. He just said it would only take a few minutes. I watched her in silence. Helen looked down, aware that every small lie was adding more fuel to the fire. I went back to the study. I closed the door and opened the cabinet where I kept the old documents. Everything was perfectly organized, except for a small bundle of papers out of place. I took it out. Copies of my passport and my driver's license were missing. A cold current ran down my spine. I sat down and wrote in my notebook. March 16th. They forged my signature. Whoever did it knows exactly how I organize my documents. That means this person has lived in this house. Outside, the wind picked up, making the oak leaves fall to the ground. I smiled bitterly. If my son had gone this far, I knew I had no time left to hesitate. From that moment, I stopped being a wounded father. I went back to being the man I once was, the one who knows how to follow a trail, the one who never gives in to a lie. The next morning I got up earlier than usual. The Chicago wind brought the last chill of winter through the window, and the house, already silent, felt even emptier. Helen was still asleep, her face worn out after a night of crying. I didn't wake her. Inside me, there was a strange mix of pain and a cold lucidity, like steel. I knew that, From that moment on, every move I made had to be as precise as a chess move. I made coffee and went straight to the small room at the end of the hall, my study, the same one where Kevin used to sit when he came to visit. In the dim light, the thin layer of dust on the table made me notice something immediately. Someone had touched everything in that room, but so carefully that it seemed like nothing had changed. I opened the second drawer, where I kept my personal documents and the photocopies of my passport. The binders were organized as always, but among them was an unusual bundle of papers, a blue folder, unlabeled. I opened it. Inside were photocopies of all my personal documents: passport, ID, the deed to the house, insurance policies, even reports from my regular checkups. Everything neatly arranged, numbered in the corners, exactly as I used to do when I organized papers at the office. There was only one difference. I hadn't prepared this file. I got to the last page, a handwritten paper with no letterhead. When I saw the handwriting, my chest tightened. It was Kevin's. A few messy lines, but with a logical order. April, request independent medical evaluation. May, complete legal file. June, transfer of property. July, final signing. I had to sit down. The room felt small, as if the four walls were closing in on me. I reread every word, hoping it was a draft for one of his own deals. But no. On the last line, the writing was thicker, slanted in a hurry. "Don't worry, Dad. Everything will be legal and orderly." I closed my eyes. Fragmented memories flooded in. The little boy running around the yard with his face smeared with ice cream, calling me his hero, and then the icy stare from the other night's dinner. Between those two images, there was now an impossible-to-fill void. I took my phone and photographed page after page. Then I put everything back exactly where it was. I couldn't leave any trace. If Kevin was smart enough to hide that file here, it was because he believed I would never find it. I'll let him think that. I stood for a long time in the hallway. In my mind, the pieces started to fit together. The hidden calls, Helen's strange silence, the fake power of attorney, and now this detailed plan for the next 4 months. I wrote in my notebook, March 17th, the takeover plan is real. April, medical exam. May, legal paperwork. June, transfer of assets. July, the end. Whoever is behind this knows the law, and they know me. I closed the notebook. There was no more fear. Only a singular calm remained. The same calm I had felt before big operations in my life. When others think they have you cornered, that's actually when you're waiting for the exact moment to counterattack. From that instant, I knew I was no longer the victim of the story. If they had their plan, I would have mine. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the phrase scribbled by Kevin reappeared in my head. "Don't worry, Dad. Everything will be legal and orderly." Those words stabbed at my mind like a thin knife, slow but deep. At midnight, I went down to the kitchen for water. Helen was there, in the dark, her shoulders barely trembling. In front of her was a small brown notebook I had never seen before. When the light fell on the table, I recognized it was a diary. "Still not sleeping?" I asked. She startled and slammed the notebook shut. "I'm just writing some things down." I approached, calm but firm. "Can I see it?" Helen hesitated. I looked her in the eyes. Finally, she took a deep breath and pushed the notebook toward me. The lines were neat, written in a hurry and had dates. Feb 24. Kevin called this morning. Asked what time Arthur gets up. Feb 28. He told me to watch if he forgets things. March 6th. Sarah said an important step is coming. I'm worried. March 10th. Kevin asked for the medicine log. Said he needs info for the doctor. I flipped through the pages quickly. At the end of the notebook, there was a half-written page. The ink was smudged. Kevin says if Dad doesn't cooperate, they'll do it another way. "There's no turning back," he said. My hands started to shake as I read. Helen lowered her head. Her voice choked. I didn't want to hide it from you, Arthur, but he called every day. He said it was just a health check, that he was doing it because he loved you. I wanted to believe him. I closed the notebook and put it on the table. Don't you see, Helen? I said. This isn't concern. This is surveillance. They're gathering evidence to declare your husband incompetent. Helen covered her face with her hands and sobbed. My God, what have I done? I stood motionless. A part of me wanted to yell at her, to unleash all my anger, but seeing her fragile shoulders, I just felt tired. They had manipulated her with the fear of losing her son. They had used her motherhood to turn her into an instrument. I put my hand on her shoulder. Listen, from now on, you don't talk to them. No calls, no messages, no errands. If they ask, you say I'm tired, that I need to rest. And everything you hear, you write down in this notebook, but you give it to me. She looked up, tears marking grooves on her cheeks. What are you going to do? I'm going to let them believe I don't suspect a thing. Sometimes to beat a lie, the best thing is to pretend you believe it. Helen nodded, trembling. I saw in her eyes, for the first time since all this, a kind of courage, weak, fragile, but real. Before going to bed, I took the diary to my room and put it next to my notebook. 2 notebooks, 2 witnesses to the same tragedy. I opened a new page and wrote, March 17th. They have turned Helen into her own husband's warden. They're recording my every gesture, my every habit. They want to prove I'm old, confused, incapacitated. They don't know I'm waiting to have enough pieces of the puzzle to see the whole board. I closed the notebook and looked out at the yard. The moon illuminated the branches of the oak tree. The wind moved them, casting shadows on the wall like tangled nets. I whispered to myself, if they want to weave a web of lies, we'll wait. And when that net closes, it will be the one that suffocates them. That night, for the first time since the dinner, I no longer felt fear. Only a firm calm, that of someone who has begun to see where to strike back. The next morning, I woke up when the city hadn't yet started to move. The first glow of dawn covered the rooftops, and the frost hung in the Chicago air like a damp blanket. Helen was still asleep, her face gaunt from sleepless nights. I looked at her for a long time, with tenderness and pity. That woman, fragile, lost, but not bad, had been dragged away by the current. If everything continued like this, soon we would both be expelled from our own lives. I went quietly to the study. On the table were the 2 notebooks, Helen's brown one and mine, now side by side like the 2 faces of the same truth. I poured coffee, opened my notebook, and began to write the first lines of my counterattack plan. Their plan: April, medical checkup; May, legal paperwork; June, property transfer; July, closing. My plan: starting today, gather evidence, protect assets, prepare legally, and wait for the moment. I wrote slowly. Every stroke was etched in my memory. I felt my blood pulse strongly, a familiar sensation for someone who has run companies, who has stood firm in crises without giving up. I started by reviewing all the house documents. The file room became a battlefield. I opened all the drawers. I looked at every folder. I compared signatures. I noted any paper out of place. I found several copies of important documents that had disappeared: bank certificates, old stock ledgers, life insurance policies. All of that, in the wrong hands, could be used to prove I was not fit to manage my assets. I closed a drawer, and in the silence I heard the ticking of the wall clock. Today, that sound no longer marked the time. It marked a countdown. Around 8, Helen got up. She came into the study, eyes swollen, and found me piling up papers. "What are you doing, Arthur?" she asked. "I'm starting to organize my life before others do it for me." She stood still and murmured, "I'll help you if you let me." I looked at her. There was something different in her gaze, not so much panic as a small spark of trust. I nodded. Start by not believing anything Kevin says. If he calls, say I'm resting, that I'm not well, and write down every call, every message. From now on, everything must have proof. Helen nodded, tears in her eyes. I approached and put my hand on her shoulder. Don't be afraid. I've lost everything before, and I rebuilt it. This time, I won't just protect the assets. I'll protect the truth. At noon, I went to my usual notary in Lincoln Park. The secretary recognized me and didn't ask too many questions when I asked for copies of all files on powers of attorney, transactions, and also my signature references. I sealed those copies and put them in the small safe. When I returned home, Helen was tidying the living room. Her gaze towards me no longer reflected panic, but a kind of hope, as if she too was grabbing the last thread of faith. At night, I sat alone in the yard. The new moon hung over the oak tree, its light tinting the leaves silver. I opened the notebook and wrote the last line of the day, March 18th. They have a web of lies. We have a web of truths. When our son returns, I'll let him believe he's still the predator. But this time, the prey will be the one setting the trap. I closed the notebook and took a sip of cold coffee. There was no longer any tremor in my body, only a calculated calm. That calm I thought I had lost with age, and which today re-emerged like a small, constant flame. I knew then, clearly, the real battle had begun. March 19th, I moved on to the second phase of my plan, to build a wall of protection. Not a wall of brick or steel, but something more solid, law, truth, and lucidity. I started the morning with a call to an old contact, Stephen Miller, a lawyer I worked with when I ran the textile company. He was famous for his discretion. He knew the law down to its cracks. And above all, he was someone who couldn't be bought. Mr. Arthur, how long has it been? His voice was still deep and polite. I need to see you in private, as soon as possible. That same afternoon, I arrived at his office on Michigan Avenue. The smell of polished wood and paper took me back to my working years. Stephen stood up to greet me. His expression changed to concern as I told him everything, without omitting a detail. Kevin's words at dinner, the missing copies, the 4-month plan I found. He remained thoughtful for a long time before speaking. Mr. Arthur, what you've just described is a deliberate plan to take over your assets. We have to act now. I don't want scandals. I just want to be protected. Then we'll get ahead of them before they attack. He showed me a legal framework he called preventative asset shielding. Convert all my assets into a personal trust, with myself as the trustee. Block the title so no transfer could be made without my authorization, and require double verification for any movement, even from heirs. Also, I would sign a certificate of cognitive capacity endorsed by 2 specialists to invalidate any attempt to declare me incompetent. Listening to him brought back the feeling of being on a corporate battlefield, advancing step by step. Stephen recommended I see a clinical psychologist to open an official file on my mental competence. I agreed. He referred me to Dr. Marybeth Jenkins, a regular collaborator with the courts. I made an appointment for the next afternoon. As I left, Stephen shook my hand firmly. Mr. Arthur, if your son wants a war, believe me, you already have a stronger fortress than they imagine. That night I returned home. Helen was sitting by the window with a rosary in her hands. I told her everything. She remained silent for a moment before whispering, I never thought we'd go this far. Me neither. But the only thing that comforts me is that we are still on the same side. I took her hand for the first time in days. It was cold and weak, but it was the same hand I had held for 40 years. The next morning, I went to Dr. Jenkins's office. She was a woman in her 50s, soft voice and clear eyes, no empty compassion. I need to prove that I am still capable of running on my life, I told her. She nodded. Then let's begin. For 3 hours, I went through tests for memory, reflexes, calculations, facial recognition, and temporal orientation. I answered everything. When we finished, she looked at me with a satisfied smile. "Mr. Arthur, your mind is more lucid than many people in their 50s I've evaluated." I thanked her. She promised to send me the report in 2 days. In the late afternoon, I stopped by my old bank branch. James Fisher received me in private. I told him about the fake power of attorney. He frowned. "We'll block all access, Mr. Arthur. From now on, anyone who wants to see your file will have to confirm it directly with you." I signed the affidavit and left. The evening light reflected off the building's glass, showing me the image of a gray-haired old man. But for the first time in weeks, I saw in that reflection not a betrayed man, but someone regaining control. That night, I wrote in my notebook, March 19th, the defense wall is up. The law is on my side. The doctor is on my side. The truth is on my side. They want me to be weak, but they forget. I've lived my whole life among wolves. Outside, the night wind passed through the oak grove. For the first time, the rustling of the leaves no longer sounded like betrayal, but like the breath of a newborn plan. March 20th, Chicago woke up shrouded in fog. I was reviewing papers when the phone rang. An unknown number. On the other end of the line was Greg Hansen, a private detective and an old acquaintance of Stevens. "Mr. Arthur, Mr. Miller recommended me. He said you need someone to watch certain family members who are acting strangely." "Correct. I need the truth, not compassion." "Then I'm your man." We met at a small cafe in Wicker Park, a place where no one would recognize me. I sat in a corner, listening to the clinking of spoons. I felt strangely calm. When Greg walked in, I knew he wasn't the detective from the movies. He was dressed simply, with sharp eyes and cautious movements. I told him everything, from the fake power of attorney to the 4-month plan. When I finished, Greg asked, "Who do you suspect is leading this?" "I'm convinced it's Sarah. Kevin doesn't have the cruelty to devise this. Someone is pulling his strings." Greg nodded. "I'll start with Sarah. Give me a week. Maybe I'll only need a few days." 3 days later, while I was cross-checking copies of documents at home, Greg called. "Mr. Arthur, I have information. We need to meet." We went back to the same cafe. He put a thick envelope on the table. "This will make you understand why everything started." Inside were printouts of emails, photos, and bank statements. Greg spoke slowly. "Sarah is in debt for over $300,000. I looked up. "Debt?" "Yes. A bad investment. She got involved in a real estate project down in Florida last year. The project tanked, and the investors want their money. Sarah guaranteed the loan. The payment is due in May." I looked at the printed figures. I felt the air leave my lungs. "All for money?" "Out of desperation," Greg said. "She needs the sum urgently to avoid being sued. And the fastest way is to control your assets. Take over your estate." He pulled out another sheet, a screenshot of Sarah's calendar. April, father-in-law's medical evaluation. May, legal documents. June, transfers. I clenched my hand. It was the same 4-month plan, the same structure, the same dates. Only the word changed. Father-in-law. Greg added, "There's more. She has called 2 law firms specializing in guardianship proceedings. That is, in legally declaring a person incompetent." "Did she mention my name?" "She didn't need to. She described a retired businessman with old assets, progressive memory loss. But I have the recording. She called from her personal cell, not the office." I leaned back in my chair and looked out the window. On the street, people walked by indifferently under the fog. No one suspected that, in a corner of the city, a man was discovering he had been the target of a meticulous campaign of dispossession, and that the instigator was his own daughter-in-law. "And Kevin?" I asked in a low voice. It seems he doesn't know about his wife's debt. For him, it's all about restructuring the assets to help his parents. I gave a bitter smile, a mix of compassion and contempt. So he thinks he's doing the right thing. Could be. But know this, Mr. Arthur, Greg said firmly. The most dangerous person isn't the evil one, but the one convinced their evil action is for the greater good. On the way back, I walked along Lake Shore Drive with the wind cutting on my face. I remembered the phrase from the dinner on March 15th, sharp as a knife. That you're here doesn't mean you're welcome. Now I understood. It wasn't just an insult. It was the opening move of a financial plan calculated down to the breath. I didn't have dinner that night. I sat by the window, watching the lights behind the branches of the oak tree. Helen brought me a cup of tea and asked quietly, "Did you find out something new?" I nodded. "Yes, and it explains everything. They're not planning to exclude you out of hatred. They're doing it for one thing, money." Helen sat next to me. "And what will you do now?" I looked far away, my voice harsh. "Did you ever ask me what I feared most? I don't fear losing assets, nor do I fear old age. I feared the day they would turn kindness into proof of weakness." I took a deep breath and wrote in the notebook, March 20th, the truth. Sarah owes money. Kevin is being manipulated. The most dangerous greed isn't that of youth, but that of desperation. I knew then that the real wave hadn't even started. I had my defense wall. Now it was time to prepare the first arrow of the counterattack. My next decision wasn't to confront them head-on at the house. I needed more information than a fit of rage could provide. If I wanted to catch the instigator, I had to get them to expose themselves with their own words and actions. So I went to where Sarah works, a small real estate office with a glass front on a busy street in downtown Chicago. I put on a black coat and walked slowly, feigning the look of a curious customer. Sarah didn't know I was coming. I sat at the cafe across the street. I ordered an espresso and watched her. She arrived on time. Blouse, hair pulled back, brisk pace, lips pressed tight. She didn't carry the air of a new mother. She had the look of a manager running a project. I saw her enter the office behind the glass. Through the panel, I could guess her gestures and the intensity with which she opened her laptop. It wasn't long before she came out with her phone in hand and dialed. Her voice cut through the glass, talking about valuation, tax opportunity, landmark assets. Those words sounded cold as a scalpel, without a trace of humanity. I acted stealthily. Feigning casualty, I entered the real estate office and asked the receptionist about a model apartment. The receptionist called Sarah. She came out flustered, and upon seeing me, her gaze tensed for an instant. I smiled and introduced myself as a client. "Hello, I'm interested in properties in the area," I said. "I've heard there's a very special house on the corner." Sarah hesitated a bit but maintained her professionalism. "Yes, there are several homes like that." "Which one are you referring to specifically?" I asked beginners questions, the typical ones from someone who doesn't understand the business. And she began to describe with technical pride. Square footage, year built, renovations, and how one could save on taxes if the owner transferred in a certain way. Then she said, without thinking too much, a detail that struck a nerve in my chest. The property on Oak Street has a reformed boiler and a new heating system, ideal for investment. My heart skipped a beat. Boiler, electrical system, details that only someone who had already thoroughly reviewed the deed would know. Keeping an innocent tone, I asked, "Really? Who did such a detailed file?" She looked around, nervous, and replied hurriedly, "It's office documentation. We always work with great detail." While she spoke, I saw a printed sheet on her desk, a budget, plans, and in the corner, the owner's name with some figures. I took out a small camera I had in my coat's inner pocket and discreetly took several photos. Everything happened naturally. as if she didn't suspect someone was watching. With the conversation already flowing, I led her to talk about personal matters and told her the story of the old gentleman I was asking about, vaguely describing the house in question as if it belonged to someone else. Sarah listened attentively. She smiled politely, but I noticed her interest was in the property's value more than the person. That confirmed my suspicions. When I left, the feeling that washed over me was a mix of relief and sadness. Sarah had given herself away. She was reviewing files, new internal data, and was already designing a concrete plan for our house as if it were merchandise. That confirmed my conclusion. She wasn't just an advisor. She was the architect of the plan. Out on the street, I took a deep breath of the cold air. I had more than just clues. I had her attitude, the motive, and the technical details to link the pieces. If necessary, images and recordings would be sharp legal weapons. That night, with a cup of tea by the window, looking at the oak tree in the yard where Helen tends her flowers, I wrote in the notebook. March 21st. Sarah isn't just an advisor. She wrote the script. The first arrow has changed its target. The house is the objective, not the parents. And inside me, the sadness and anger quieted, replaced by another feeling: determination. March 22nd. A fog covered the Chicago rooftops that morning. Sitting by the window, watching the drops on the oak leaves, I felt it was time to face Kevin. I couldn't just keep gathering evidence alone. I needed to hear him say things in his own voice, even if it hurt me one more time. I called him. His voice sounded surprised and tense. "Dad, is something wrong?" "Yes, I want to talk. Just you and me. Today at 6. Come." There was a brief silence. I heard him breathe and then, in a strained voice, "Okay, I'll be there." I spent the day preparing as if for a life or death negotiation. In the living room, I placed a small recorder hidden behind a vase and carefully checked the battery. Helen looked at me, worried. "Are you really going to record him?" she asked. "I don't have a choice anymore, Helen. If I'm ever taken to court, at least I'll have proof I'm not crazy." At 6 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. I opened the door. Kevin was there, impeccable in a suit, holding a folder of papers. His smile was polite, distant, far from the warmth of the boy I once took to the lake in Michigan. "Dad, I don't want to fight. I just want to clear things up." "Good, so do I." We sat across from each other in the living room. Helen served coffee and retreated to the kitchen, not daring to intervene. Kevin opened the folder and spoke with chilling coldness. "I've reviewed your financial situation. Your assets are too scattered. If you agree, Sarah and I can help you centralize the management." I asked, "Help how?" "Transfer the temporary title to us. You would continue to live here and have a life estate. But legally, the assets would be in our name to optimize taxes." I looked at him, trying to stay calm. "Does that mean I'll live like a renter in my own house?" "Dad, don't look at it that way. It's to protect you. The law is complicated now. You're not at an age to deal with this." I tilted my head, my voice harsh. "And if I say no?" He paused for an instant and replied, "Then we'll have to take other legal measures." I feigned ignorance. "What measures?" "I've consulted the law. If there are signs of cognitive decline, the court can appoint a guardian. I just want to ensure your well-being." I managed a smile and looked him straight in the eye. "You say well-being, but you're really talking about control, aren't you?" Kevin fell silent. He looked down and started shuffling papers, avoiding my gaze. I was quiet for a moment and then asked him softly, "And Sarah, what role does she play?" He answered quickly, almost by reflex. "Sarah just wants to help. She knows the law. I interrupted him. "Sarah is in debt, Kevin. Did you know that?" He snapped his head up, surprised. I saw genuine fear in his eyes for a split second. "Who told you that?" "Someone who knows how to find the truth," The air grew thick. Kevin closed the folder and said in a low voice, "Dad, you don't understand everything." I stood up, my voice heavy. "Maybe I don't understand everything, but I do know the one thing. No one will strip me of what I've built my entire life. Not with laws, and not with blood ties." I saw disorientation in his face, not pride. For the first time in days, it wasn't arrogance I saw, but confusion. I sat back down and spoke to him more calmly. "You can choose whatever path you want, Kevin. But remember, if you choose betrayal, I will be the first and the last person you'll have to face." He was speechless. Then he stood up heavily. "I'll think about it, Dad." The door closed behind him. The recorder was still running. The small red light blinked in the darkness. I took my notebook and wrote, March 22nd. The meeting didn't end in tears, but in truth. I now have the confession, albeit indirect, needed to start the offensive. That night, the house sank back into silence. Helen had gone to the bedroom early, and I stayed alone in the living room, where hours before I'd had the conversation with Kevin. On the table was the cold coffee cup and the folder he had forgotten. The room seemed to breathe with another presence. Cold, lifeless, permeated by the smell of ink and paper. I turned on the recorder and hit play. My son's voice came through clearly, word for word. "If Dad doesn't cooperate, I'll have to resort to legal measures." That phrase cut like a slow knife, leaving a wound in my memory. I had heard other phrases from him. "I'll make you proud. I want to be like you." Now he was saying, legal measures. A son talking to his father in the distant language of a lawyer. I turned off the machine and put my hand to my forehead. The light faded in the room. Only a faint glow came from the hallway. I looked around. The old photo. The tablecloth my mother embroidered. The red bricks my own hands laid one by one. All silent. Mute witnesses that couldn't speak. I remembered the first day I took Kevin to school. He held my hand, his fingers trembling, and asked, "Dad, will I make any friends?" I smiled. "If you treat people well, you'll never be alone." I never imagined that, more than 30 years later, I would have to relearn that lesson. Loneliness under my own roof. I went out to the yard. The moon weakly lit the tops of the oak trees I planted when he was born. The night wind smelled of damp earth and tightened my throat. I sat in the old wooden chair. I opened the notebook and wrote slowly. March 22nd. I have heard my own son talk about using the law to take away what I built. But what hurts most isn't the loss. It's recognizing that the love I gave him was turned into an instrument. A tear fell onto the page and blurred the ink. I don't remember the last time I cried. Maybe the day my father died, years ago. Then, too, I sat under the moon, too young to understand separation. Now I'm old, and the feeling is the same, empty, with nothing to hold on to. Helen came out with a thin blanket. "Still not sleeping?" she asked. I shook my head. She sat next to me and put her hand on my shoulder. "Maybe he doesn't fully understand, Arthur. Maybe he's being guided." I looked at her, my voice harsh. "You know what the most terrible part is? It's not that he's lying. It's that he believes he's doing the right thing." Helen was silent. The wind moved her hair. A few white strands shone in the moonlight. We sat there, two old people who had lost faith but were trying to hold on to the love that remained. I closed the notebook and said quietly, "I don't want revenge, Helen. I want my son to see what he did. If we have to fight, let it be to wake him up, not to sink him." She squeezed my hand and nodded. In that instant, I understood that the coming battle wouldn't just be legal. It would be a fight for the heart, between a father who still loves and a son who has lost himself. That night, for the first time in many years, I prayed. Not to win, but so that, in winning, I would have the humility needed to remain compassionate. March 23rd, I got up before it was fully light. The house was wrapped in a light fog, so silent you could hear the clock ticking in the living room. But in my head, everything was clear. It was time to counterattack. I couldn't wait for Kevin or Sarah to strike the first blow. In the years I ran the company, I learned one rule. When your adversary thinks you're weak, that's the moment you are strongest, if you act decisively. And that morning, I was going to act. I contacted Greg Hansen, the private investigator. "Greg, I need the addresses and details of Sarah's creditors." He was concise. "I already have it, Mr. Arthur. 3 main people. One of them, Nicholas Reed, is pushing the hardest." I smiled slightly, not out of joy, but because I finally had a thread that pulled the whole tangle. "Thanks, Greg. I'll take care of contacting them." "What are you planning to do?" he asked. "I'm going to tell them the truth," I replied, "and I'll let Sarah bear the consequences of her own greed." That afternoon I called Nicholas Reed. His voice on the other end of the line sounded rough and sharp. "Who's this?" "Arthur. I'm Sarah's father-in-law." There was a silence, and then, with curiosity, "The house on Oak Street, right? I know about it. Sarah told me you would guarantee her debt." "She's lying," I said bluntly. "I didn't guarantee anything. I didn't sign any document. If she gave you something with my signature, it's a forgery." A prolonged silence. Nicholas let out a dry laugh. "So the girl tried to trick me. Thanks, Mr. Arthur. I'll have my lawyer look into this immediately." "Do that. I'll cooperate if you need proof." When I hung up, I felt a slight relief. Sarah would have to face a legal truth she wasn't expecting. In the afternoon, I went to see Stephen Miller. He quickly reviewed the papers I brought and looked up. "Mr. Arthur, this is perfect. We don't need to sue yet. Let's let them tangle themselves up." I nodded. "And when they fall, I want it to be because of the lies they themselves wove." Stephen also prepared a document, a complaint for forgery of personal documents. With a formal complaint, the police must open a file. "I won't file it yet," I told him. "I want them to expose themselves first." He looked at me with a mix of admiration and concern. "You never forget how to calculate." That evening, I received a call from Sarah. Her voice was trembling, but she maintained a controlled tone. "Mr. Arthur, I heard you spoke with some people. What's going on?" "The usual, Sarah. Just doing what a father must do, protect his family from someone trying to sell it." "You're mistaken. It was all to help Kevin." "Help by forging my signature?" I cut her off. "If you still consider yourself innocent, keep at it. You'll see the cost of underestimating old people." I hung up and stood in silence. Helen came out of the room and asked quietly, "Who were you talking to?" "Someone who was about to get burned," I replied. She squeezed my hand. "I'm scared, Arthur. This is going too far." "Don't be afraid, Helen. We didn't start this war, but I will finish it." I went out to the yard and looked at the long shadows of the oak trees under the moon. For the first time, the moonlight didn't seem cold. It shone like a sharp sword, hanging over those who believe they've already won. I opened the notebook and wrote, "March 23rd. Sarah has started to tremble. Kevin will be next." When the darkness is thickest, the light doesn't need to be blinding, just bright enough to show the way. I knew then that tomorrow, the final contest would begin. March 24th. I was sitting in my study at dawn. The first light of day snuck through the window and drew a long stripe on the wooden floor. Everything seemed calm, but beneath that calm I knew the storm had already begun. Around 10, the phone rang. It was Greg Hansen. "Mr. Arthur, I have news. Nicholas Reed just filed a fraud complaint against Sarah regarding the guarantee contract. They're summoning her to testify this week." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. It wasn't exactly relief, but the feeling that the wheel had begun to turn in the right direction. "Thanks, Greg. Keep watching everything." At noon, Kevin called. His voice was tense with a threat of panic. "Dad, what did you do to Sarah? She just got summoned by the police." "Me?" I replied calmly. Ask your wife. If she did something, now she'll have to face the consequences." "You don't understand. This is all getting serious," he said. "I know more than you think, Kevin. This is the consequence of putting lies before justice." I listened to him in silence. Maybe for the first time he didn't know what to say. "Are you scared?" I said slowly. "Well, good. This is the moment you must learn the lesson I always repeated to you. Every victory based on deceit destroys itself." In the afternoon, Helen brought me a cup of coffee. "I heard Kevin," she murmured. "He sounded desperate." "He needs to be," I replied. "Sometimes people only see their truth when they hit rock bottom." She sat down and after a long silence, asked me quietly, "Do you think he still has a chance to turn back?" I looked at the yard where the oak branches swayed in the wind. There's always a chance, if he knows how to repent, but that's a path he has to walk himself. Later I received a message from Stephen Miller. "Mr. Arthur, the police confirm. They've flagged a forged signature on the bank power of attorney. They are opening an investigation." I gripped the phone in my hands. I felt no joy or triumph, only a deep-seated fatigue, a tiredness from having to prove the truth inside my own home. That night, Helen said, "I'm afraid that if this goes to trial, people will find out everything. What will they say about our family?" I looked at her gently. "They'll say a father dared to defend his honor, and whoever betrayed him, even if they're family, will have to pay." I went out to the yard and sat by the old oak tree. In the darkness, I remembered Kevin's look the night he said, "That you're here doesn't mean you're welcome." Now that memory didn't hurt me as it did before. It made me sad for a son who allowed others to steer his heart. The half-moon hung low, its silver light bathing the leaves like a thin layer of time. I opened the notebook and wrote, "March 24th. The wall is firm, and the ground on the other side is starting to give way. My son still doesn't understand that I'm not fighting to win, but to preserve the value of the love he has forgotten. And if one day he wakes up, I'll still be here, not as an enemy, but as a witness to his return." I closed the notebook and looked at the sky. A shooting star crossed in a brief flash, like a whisper from the past. I smiled. The fight was nearing its end, and inside, I only wished for one thing: that victory wouldn't turn me into someone incapable of compassion. March 25th. Chicago woke up to rain. The drops hit the roof with a steady rhythm that filled the house with a heavy melancholy. Sitting by the window, I reread the message from Stephen. Sarah has been summoned a second time. It's possible the police will expand the investigation for forgery of public documents. I put the phone on the table and took a deep breath. I had waited for this moment, but I couldn't deny a pang of sadness. After all, she was still my son's wife. At noon, the doorbell rang. Helen opened the door and returned, her face upset. "It's Kevin," she whispered. "He's here." I stood up. My son was soaked from the rain, his face exhausted, his eyes sunken. There was no arrogance left in him, none of that confidence of someone in control, just a man overwhelmed by fear and remorse. I motioned for Helen to go to the kitchen and invited him to sit. "What do you want to tell me, son?" He lowered his head. His voice was hoarse, trembling. "Dad, everything is falling apart. Sarah's been called in by the police, and I don't know what to do." I watched him in silence. "Did you come to save her, or to save yourself?" He didn't answer. A moment passed before he murmured, "I think I need to tell the truth." He began to speak, his words choppy. Sarah had hidden the debt from him. She had convinced him that legalizing the assets was just a tax formality, that it was all for my benefit. She invented stories about my forgetfulness, until she made Kevin believe he was doing the right thing. "I believed her, Dad," he said, his voice breaking. "I was an idiot. I thought I was protecting you, and what I was doing was betraying you." He put his head in his hands, holding back tears. "I just wanted to make you proud," to show you I could handle things. And I didn't see I was losing the most important thing, your trust. I looked at my son, the man I taught to drive, to tie a tie, to face defeats. Now he was trembling in front of me like a lost child, looking for the way back home. I stood up slowly and put a hand on his shoulder. You made a mistake, Kevin. But what hurts most isn't the mistake. It's that you allowed others to define what was right. I don't need you to prove anything to me. I just want you to not lose the best part of yourself. He broke down, crying silently. I'm sorry, Dad. 2 simple words, and yet they tightened my throat. I had been waiting weeks to hear them, not to forgive him, but to know there was still some goodness left in him. Helen came out with a steaming teapot. She looked at us without speaking and put a hand on Kevin's shoulder. A slight gesture, a mix of pain and forgiveness. After a silence, I told him, from now on, you will cooperate with the lawyer, with Stephen. You'll tell him everything. If you have any dignity left, help me bring the truth to light. Kevin nodded, his eyes firmer. I will, Dad. I promise. When he left, I kept looking out the window. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still heavy with clouds. My chest felt lighter, though full of scars. I opened my notebook and wrote, March 25th. My son has cried. He has admitted his guilt, and perhaps he has begun to understand. Some storms are necessary to clear the dust from the heart, and after the rain, sometimes the light returns. I closed the notebook and let the night wind come through the window. For the first time in many days, there was no anger inside me, only a faint, but real, hope. March 26th. Chicago woke up clear after the rain. Dewdrops sparkled on the oak leaves like tiny mirrors. I knew that day something would change forever. Stephen Miller arrived with a thick folder and a calm expression. Mr. Arthur, everything is clear, he said. The police confirmed that all the forged signatures were made by Sarah and someone in her circle. And my son? I asked. Kevin cooperated fully. He turned over emails and messages, even the 4-month plan. His testimony was decisive. I felt relief and sadness. No father wants to see his son testify against his wife, but sometimes it's the only way to repair what's broken. Stephen pulled out another document. They've ordered the arrest of Sarah. The charges are forgery and property fraud. Helen brought a hand to her chest, trembling. They arrested her? I nodded. And this time, not because of my words, but because of the evidence our son provided. Stephen looked at me with respect. You've faced all this with admirable serenity, Mr. Arthur. You've protected not only your assets, but your honor. I smiled tiredly. Thank you, but even victories leave wounds. In the afternoon, Kevin came to see me. No suit, no briefcase, just tired eyes. Dad, they arrested Sarah, he said, his voice cracking. I know. He was silent before continuing. When I saw her in handcuffs, I understood what you went through. I thought about that night, about my words, and I don't know if you've forgiven me. Forgiving isn't forgetting, I replied. But if you've had the courage to face the truth, I don't need anything more. Tears fell to the floor. I put a hand on his shoulder. Don't let guilt paralyze you. Turn the pain into strength to be better. Helen came over and hugged us. In that gesture, all the anger dissolved. That night, I wrote, Justice doesn't need swords, only time and patience. My son has paid his price, but he has found his way. The truth doesn't always destroy. Sometimes it heals. I knew then that I had crossed to the other side of fear, towards peace. March 27th. The sun returned to Chicago. The light filtered through the dining room window, illuminating the dust suspended in the air. The house felt different. No arguments, no weight, just the smell of coffee and the soft sound of silverware as Helen prepared breakfast. Everything was the same. but the atmosphere was breathing again. I felt life slowly returning. Mid-morning, Kevin arrived. White shirt, simple jeans, a bag of bread. "I brought bread from that cafe you like," he said timidly. Helen smiled at him. "Sit down, son." We sat in our old spots. Kevin looked around. "I thought I'd never sit here again." "This house never closed its doors to you," I replied. "It was just waiting for you to come back without lies." He looked down. "I've spoken with Stephen. I'm going to testify to everything to close the case." "Do it for yourself, not for me," I said. "Close that dark chapter and start a new one." Helen passed him a cup of coffee. The silence that followed was warm, healing. Outside, the sun drew our shadows on the wall, like a family photo frozen in time. Later, he asked, "Dad, why didn't you turn in the evidence sooner?" I looked at the yard. "Because I didn't want you to hate your wife. Young people only change when they understand for themselves. You had to walk your own path." "Did it hurt you a lot?" he whispered. "There was pain, but I never stopped loving you." Under the table, Helen squeezed my hand. In that gesture, there was a silent gratitude. For both men, learning again how to be father and son. As he left, Kevin looked at me and smiled. The first sincere smile in months. That night I wrote, "There are cracks that don't exist to break, but to let the light in. The bond between father and son, although it changes, becomes more true." Today the house was warm again, not from the fire, but from the heart. March 28th. Chicago woke up cold, but the singing of sparrows brought a new air. It reminded me of when Kevin was a boy, running through the yard with a piece of bread in his hand. Helen was making coffee. "Kevin's coming for dinner tonight," she said with a smile. "He wants to cook." I laughed. "Let's hope his dish doesn't set off the smoke alarm." Helen laughed too. Her laugh brought a forgotten music back to the home. In the afternoon, I went out to the yard. The old oak tree, witness to our lives, was showing green buds. I ran my hand over its bark and thought that reconciliation was possible. At dusk, Kevin arrived with ingredients: beef, mushrooms, red wine. "Today I want to make pot roast, your favorite dish." "Then I'll be the taste tester," I said. The three of us worked together in the kitchen. Helen chopped vegetables. I peeled garlic and Kevin managed the pot. The aroma of the wine filled the house. No one spoke much, but every gesture was a silent apology. During dinner, Kevin raised his glass. "Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I didn't deserve it." Helen replied sweetly, "You always deserved it, son. Sometimes you have to get lost to find yourself." "Enough blame," I said, raising my glass. "Tonight we eat as a family." The clinking of glasses resonated like a starting bell. Later in the yard, Kevin confessed, "When this is all over, I'm leaving the firm. I want to start something that has meaning, maybe helping elderly people so they don't suffer what you went through." I looked at him with pride. Now that is my son. Helen rested her head on my shoulder. Kevin watched the city lights. The silence enveloped us, but it was no longer heavy. It was the silence of forgiveness. That night I wrote, "Today my family sat together without lies. Love doesn't die. It only sleeps, and it needs a shake to wake up. The storm has passed, and I understand. No betrayal can defeat true love." March 29th. The dawn covered the neighborhood in calm. On the porch, coffee in hand, I watched the sun's rays pass through the branches of the oak tree. After the storm, the tree had new buds. I thought that people can also be reborn if they still seek the light. Helen came out and put a scarf around my neck. "It's still cold, old man." "I still have strength for more springs," I replied, laughing. From the kitchen came Kevin's voice. "Dad, the coffee's ready. I put cinnamon in it, just how you like it." I went inside. On the wall, the family photo I had put away was back in its place. Breakfast was simple: toast, cheese, and laughter. Helen talked about the neighbors. Kevin made jokes, and I just listened. Maybe happiness is just that, a meal without silence or fear. Afterward, we went out to the yard. "Dad," he said, "I've already submitted my resignation. I want to open an organization to help the elderly for free." I looked at him, holding back emotion. "It's the first time you've chosen what's right on your own. I know I can't erase my mistakes, but I want to live in a way that doesn't disappoint you." I put my hand on his shoulder. "The only one who fails is the one who doesn't try to change. You're back, and that's enough." The wind brought the smell of earth and chamomile. I understood that the resentment and betrayal were just dust. What remained was compassion. In the afternoon, I opened my notebook, my companion through the dark days. On the last page I wrote, March 29th, "This story doesn't end with winners or losers, but with an awakening. I didn't lose my family. I found them again, more real and mature. The one who betrayed learned to love. And I, the rejected father, now know that forgiving doesn't weaken. It's the only way to let light in where there was once darkness." I closed the notebook and looked at the yard. Kevin was pruning the oak tree. Helen was hanging new flowers. Their voices mixed with the afternoon glow, warm as an old melody returning after years of silence. I took a deep breath. The air, the earth, the peace filled my lungs. I finally knew the storm was over. If this story captivated you, like the video, subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click the box on the left of the screen. Thanks for watching.